Hello, and welcome to the Rodenticide Stewardship Training for Pest Management Professionals. Let's get started with an introduction by Dr. Jim Fredericks with the National Pest Management Association.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jim Fredericks with the National Pest Management Association. Each and every day, more than 150,000 pest control experts from 20,000 companies visit homes and businesses across the United States to control rats and mice. In a recent NPMA survey of U.S. homeowners, we learned that in the past year, 1 out of every 3 people saw a rodent in their home. Rodents invading our spaces are more than just a nuisance. Rodents spoil food, they spread disease, and they damage property. So we have an obligation to make sure the rodent control products that we use, including rodenticides, are applied in a responsible way, ensuring that they continue to be available for pest control professionals to use in defense of public health and safety. It's up to you and me to use these products only in ways that minimize the potential for negative impacts on non-target species. This video was developed by the Rodenticide Task Force, a cooperative effort between suppliers, applicators, and researchers. In it, leading experts in rodent control and biology, Dr. Claudia Riegel, Mr. Timmy Madere, Dr. Neve Quinn, and Dr. Bobby Corrigan will talk about pest control principles and the importance of using rodenticides within an integrated pest management program. So watch carefully and take some time to learn more about how to safely and effectively use rodenticides. If you have questions, always start with reading the product label. Then reach out to your supervisor or your rodenticide supplier and find the correct answer before proceeding. For more information about the Rodenticide Task Force, visit responsiblerodenticides.org.
This training is produced by the Rodenticide Task Force, which is comprised of rodenticide manufacturers. The task force is committed to providing educational information on the use of rodenticides, protecting the environment, non-target animals, public health, and food supplies. By using rodenticides properly as part of an IPM program, their effectiveness can be maximized while minimizing risk to other animals and the environment. Here is an overview of what we are going to cover today. While this course is not accredited for continuing education units, at the end of this presentation, you will have an opportunity to take an optional quiz to test your knowledge. So let's get started. There are several reasons why rodents are problematic pests. Compared to other mammals, they have a high reproductive rate. When populations are left unchecked with ample food and space, rodent numbers can reach into the thousands in less than a year. Their small size and mostly nocturnal habit allows them to hide from most visual inspections. People often don't notice they have a rodent issue until they see secondary signs such as feeding damage or droppings, or populations are high enough they start seeing the animals themselves. Rodents can get into structures through very small openings. Mice need just a quarter of an inch to squeeze into an opening, and a full-grown rat needs just a half an inch. Rodents like to gnaw and chew through food packaging, trash bins, wires, and more, causing structural damage. They carry numerous diseases that can be dangerous to people. There are many rodent species in North America. The species that are considered structural and public health pests are the house mouse, the roof rat, and the Norway rat. They are also called commensal rodents. Commensal describes rodents that are dependent on humans for food, water, and shelter. As pest management professionals, we are most concerned with these species because they are invading our structures and contaminating and destroying our food. None of these 3 species are native to the US. They were brought in on ships from Europe starting in the 17th century. Native species can be just as problematic, such as deer mice and voles. Wherever you are in the country, native or non-native species are present, and one or more of these species will likely be a pest. Read the rodenticide label to make sure you are applying the bait according to label instructions and for the approved sites and target species. It is important to consider your application site. Agricultural sites will have different baiting strategies than food processing sites or residential sites. Proper rodent identification is a crucial part of pest management. So let's have a look at the house mouse and compare it to other species. Adult house mice measure 5 to 7 inches long, including the tail. Their color is light brownish to gray with a gray or buff colored belly. Their tails are nearly hairless with obvious scale rings. Mice and their fleas carry harmful diseases, and mouse urine can cause allergies in children. Deer mice are similar in size to house mice. However, deer mice have larger eyes and white underbelly and a furry tail that is bicolor. The tail is brownish on the top and white on the bottom. Deer mice are common carriers of hantavirus. The virus is transmitted primarily by inhalation of contaminated dust particles. Voles are similar in size to house mice. Their coloration can differ from light to dark depending on the species. In general, voles are stockier than mice with smaller eyes, ears, and a shorter tail. Voles prefer to live outside where they dig burrows, create runways in the lawns, and destroy garden pests. As you can see, house mice, deer mice, and voles all look very similar. It is important to properly identify your target species and make sure it's listed on the label. Let's talk rats. The body of an adult Norway rat measures 7 to 10 inches. It is often referred to as sewer rat or brown rat due to its coat color. The tail is usually a little shorter than the body length, and they have small ears. It's a good swimmer, but a poor climber. In comparison, the roof rat is an excellent climber. It has a smaller body size than the Norway rat, but has a longer tail than its body size. It has larger eyes and ears than the Norway rat. Just like any rodent, rats can spread numerous diseases and bring fleas, mites, ticks, and lice into homes or businesses. There are many resources available to learn more about rodents, such as the National Pest Management Association and the West Coast Rodent Academy at the University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources. Please visit their websites for more information. Rodent baits are pesticides that control rodents. There are a number of different formulations, including block, meal, soft, and pelleted. Baits typically include an active ingredient to kill the rodent and various other ingredients to cater to the taste preferences of the rodents you are targeting. Some rodent baits include two active ingredients to not only kill the rodents, but also kill the fleas and ticks on the rodents. As with any pesticide, rodenticides must be used according to label instructions for both safety and efficacy. The label is the law. Not following label instructions is a violation of federal and state law. Rodenticides are categorized as first and second generation anticoagulant rodenticides and acute or non-anticoagulant rodenticides. First generation anticoagulant rodenticides inhibit blood clotting. They were first developed and registered in the early 1950s. Rodenticides that are considered first generation anticoagulants include the active ingredients warfarin, chlorphacinone, and diphacinone. These rodenticides generally require multiple feedings for a lethal dose. Second generation anticoagulant rodenticides were developed in the 1970s and are more potent than the first generation compounds. Included in this class of anticoagulants are bromadiolone, brdyficum, diphenthionate, and difenicum. These active ingredients generally require fewer feedings and smaller doses for a rodent to receive a lethal dose. Acute or non anticoagulant rodenticides work differently than anticoagulant baits. The three active ingredients that fall into this category are bromethylene and zinc phosphide, which act as neurotoxins, and cholecalciferol, which causes hyperglycemia, resulting in multiple organ failure. Generally, bromethylene and zinc phosphide are lethal in a single feeding, while cholecalciferol can take multiple feedings. All rodenticides, with a few exceptions, are registered by the EPA, which reviews manufacturer efficacy testing and other data. Rodenticides' active ingredients are mixed with other ingredients to manufacture bait, which come in many forms. As part of the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA, rodent bait products have to go through a rigorous review process before they receive an EPA registration. EPA reviews all study data, including chemistry, performance, and toxicology, to evaluate product efficacy as well as ecological and human health risks. The EPA also has the power to put a stop sale on a pesticide or completely cancel the registration. For more information, please visit the websites of the US EPA and your specific state pest regulatory agency. We are now going to hear about the components of an IPM program from Dr. Claudia Regal, the director of the City of New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board.
I'm Claudia Regal. I'm the director of the City of New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board, and today I'm going to talk about integrated rodent management. So our facility, our organization actually was founded in 1964, so we've had a long time, right, to work on rodents and mosquitoes, and over the years we've brought in termites, so we do all kinds of pest control here at the City of New Orleans. So our main issues here, and I think for many, are going to be your commensal rodents. And so these are two examples. We've got the Norway rat on top and the roof rat at the bottom with that long tail. But those are our two rats that we find in our region. And as well, we've got the house mouse. This is our third commensal rodent. So those are common inside structures, and occasionally we will see them outside as well. So, as being, an employee of the city, we're always thinking about a larger scale. What are the issues, right, with rodents? And so what is that rodent urban problem? Well, of course, food contamination, super important. We're in a city with lots of restaurants and, lots of food establishments, so we want people locally as well as our visitors to be safe. Destruction to property is another huge issue when it comes to rats and mice. They can be gnawing wires, actually burrowing under sidewalks that cave in, all kinds of issues. And I say possible transmission of disease, but the potential is huge, and we're going to talk about it because we know in our region that our rodents have many different pathogens. And we do get, in some cases, some human outcomes that are not so great. Increased cases of asthma. We don't want any student in a classroom suffering from asthma because of either cockroach or mouse or rodent or rat allergies. And also, it just doesn't look good for cities, right? We want people to come to a city and enjoy their time and not have rats streak through the street or in a restaurant. So very, very important. So there are lots of definitions of what integrated pest management can be, depending on what pest you use. You can have an agricultural pest. In our case, it's an urban pest. But there are going to be some steps of identification, inspection. In some cases, you're even going to set a threshold. If you're in a school, one mouse is too many. One rat is too many. But looking at a municipal standpoint, we're never going to get those numbers down to zero. So we're going to do multiple, deployment of strategies, and of course we want to evaluate our effectiveness. But I like to boil down the definition to even a more simple level. Is we're using public education, inspection, surveillance when you can, improved sanitation, exclusion, and of course as part of any IPM program, you're going to be using some pesticides or mechanical use. So keep it simple, multiple strategies. That's what we're trying to do. Education is often left to the end of a discussion, but I really want to talk about it on the front end, because if we're able to educate our stakeholders, which are our residents, our business owners, our government officials, hopefully we won't have some of the issues and remediate some of those conducive conditions that are really leading to those rodent problems to begin with. So survey and surveillance, let's talk about the difference between both, right? A survey is a one-time gathering of information, and surveillance is a continual process that you're going to monitor changes in those populations. So it's a lot easier, honestly, to do a one-time survey, which is super important. But we really need to think about how we can do surveillance for rodent control, rats and mice, on a large municipal level. So it helps indicate when you need control measures. It also measures your effectiveness of your treatments. So sanitation and exclusion, absolutely key to success. Sanitation, good sanitation is rodent control, all right? So the sanitation limits the rodent populations. It expedites the control because it allows for that food competition to be removed, and those animals come visit the stations and traps that we're setting out there. And so we need to educate our stakeholders, again, our residents, our business owners, about what are the rules, what are the ordinances, and just really what that means. We also work with a lot of other agencies, such as the health inspectors and code enforcement. It really is a team of folks that are out there enforcing this code so that we get good sanitation in general. A big one I think that cities have been moving towards is really closing your garbage, right, that's out on the street. Most cities are going to have open garbage cans, and those are going to provide food for those animals. And so moving to those closed garbage systems, no matter which one you pick, is a great way of limiting that food source and, again, getting those rodents that are there into our products. All right, so this is, I think, a great picture because it shows, like, if you look at it from the street, it looks great, right? But there's one glaring thing, and that is a big hole at that edge of that door where those animals can go in. So we need to continue to push sanitation as well as exclusion so that when we go to the effort of putting out bait stations, putting out snap traps, and doing other work, those animals are actually going to easily and quickly move into those devices. Now, population reduction is a huge part of any program, right? And that's going to include trapping as well as the use of rodenticides. And so there are lots of different traps out there. You can select the traps that you like, but we need everyone that's using them to be very careful and be very smart about how you're using it. What we want to do is not train those animals, to avoid those stations and traps. And so when you're using those snap traps, look at what kind of bait options, right? Those food sources that you're using, mix it up, see what they like to eat, what's their preference, and eliminate all the other food sources around. And so that's part, again, of that IPM. If you think you need 10 stations, put 20 or 30 because you probably need more. And bring those traps to those animals. And so look for those runs, look for the rub marks, look for the droppings, those openings. Those are all locations. And of course, finally, the use of rodenticides. That's something that we use at the City of New Orleans. And again, it is part of that integrated rodent management plan. Always read the label, all right? We want people using the right dosages per location. Super important. You don't ever want to underdose, and you don't actually want to use more than what that bait label allows. So read that label. And then maintain a fresh source of bait for as long as feeding persists. One of the things that people often do is they put a little bit out, but they don't go back. So we need our folks to go back and service. Bring those stations to the rat or to the rodent like we've talked about before. That placement is very important. If you're going to go to the effort of putting it out there, make sure that the openings, all that is correct. And those stations need to be monitored regularly. Of course, that individual pest management professional is going to make that decision, but you don't put a station out once and then go back a year later. We really need to go out there. When you're done, remove those stations, all right? And a building may not need to be encircled with bait stations. It may just be in the areas that you see activity. So all of that makes a huge difference in reducing, right, the amount of product that you're using. You're doing great placement and also helping with avoid non-targets. Here's just some great examples here. Again, if you're going to go out there and place a station, do it correctly. Make sure it's anchored. Make sure the opening's in the right place. We want to actually reach those rodents and not anything else. It is very important to use an IPM program for rodent management. We need to use multiple tactics in order to be successful at controlling those populations. Also, focus on those conducive conditions. We want our snap traps to be effective. We want our bait and bait stations to be effective. But when that food competition is there, it makes it very difficult. Rats are constantly exploring and re-exploring their surroundings, so you really need to come up with what your management and monitoring program is going to be. You have to go to those sites, inspect, do what needs to be done so that you understand if you have activity again. Bring the trap to the rat or to the mouse, all right? So when you just ring a building every 20 feet with a bait station, you're not really doing smart rodent control. You need to look at those conducive conditions and pay attention. And also, really finally with this is that sanitation is rodent control. Everything we do, it has to have sanitation behind it.
The labels of the different rodenticides vary, particularly with target pests and bait application rates. Labels also change, so it's vital that you read and follow the label of the product you are using. If you have any questions, you can reach out to the product manufacturer for clarity. Applicator protection is important when handling rodenticides. This label requires the applicator to wear long sleeved shirt and long pants, socks and shoes, and waterproof gloves. Wear waterproof gloves when removing unused bait and when retrieving carcasses. The amount of rodenticide to be used in each station or placement is specified on the label. There are different application rates depending on formulations and target pests. Therefore, it is important to read the label in its entirety before application. Maintain a constant supply of fresh bait until rodent signs cease. Timeframes vary dependent on the type of bait used. Bait stations are mandatory for outdoor, above ground placement. Tamper-resistant bait stations must be used if children, pets, and other non-target animals may have access to the bait. As you can see here, the bait is secured on the rods inside the station to prevent rodents from pulling it out, and the stations have a locking mechanism to keep non-target animals and people from opening the station. It is recommended that stations placed outside are weighted or otherwise secured to the ground so they stay in place. Some products may be applied directly into burrows to control Norway rats and roof rats within 100 feet of buildings and man-made structures. Only pellet and meal bait formulations that are specifically labeled for this use can be applied. Never place any other type of formulation into a burrow. Observe the area to ensure that burrows are active and occupied by either Norway or roof rats. Place the bait at least 6 inches down the burrow to ensure that it is not accessible by non-target animals. Do not cave in the burrow opening because the rat will dig it back out and therefore kick out the bait instead of consuming it. Making notes and sketches of which burrows you have applied the bait will keep track of activity and the effectiveness of your applications. Return to the site frequently, within a week or less, to check for issues, including bait being pushed out of the burrows to avoid non-target animals potentially being exposed to the bait. Always remove any rat carcasses on site to minimize secondary exposure. It is important to monitor the site for rat activity on an ongoing basis because new rats may recolonize the burrows. Although labels state that bait can be placed without bait stations indoors in locations out of reach of children, pets, domestic animals, and non target wildlife, these placements should be done with extra care. Rodents may drag baits into open. Pets and children can enter areas they normally aren't allowed to. Appliances get moved, and uneaten baits can turn up long after they were applied. In these examples, bait was placed without a bait station in areas that were not accessible to children and pets. However, the refrigerator was moved, but bait was exposed in the open. Attic spaces are subject to potential non-targets if bait is not placed in bait stations. For example, if repairs are required, or insulation is replaced, or if other wildlife gets into the attic. Always provide the residents or occupants with a written record of your bait placements, including the amount of bait, number and locations of placements, product label, and emergency contact number for you or your company. Each label is very specific on the use restrictions regarding bait placement. Here are some examples. Make sure to avoid the following label violations. Do not place near ventilation ducts. Do not use for burrow baiting unless specified on the product label. Do not apply near home gardens or other food crops. Do not place bait in locations from where you cannot retrieve it. An applicator should never lose control over the pesticides they apply. In addition to the label, there are best management practices that have been developed by industry experts. Regularly visit the treatment area. If something is creating a problem at the site, you need to troubleshoot and be prepared to remove or adjust bait stations as necessary. Make sure to be aware of any potential issues as illustrated in the slide. Never abandon bait placements once an account is no longer active. You are responsible for retrieving all the bait and bait stations that you applied. Abandoned bait can attract insects that may spread bait particles to other locations and create other pest issues. Abandoned bait can be found by children's, pets, and wildlife. We are now going to hear about house mice and rodent control in residential versus agricultural settings from Mr. Timmy Madere, a rodentologist with the New Orleans Mosquito, Termite, and Rodent Control Board.
Hi everyone, I'm Timmy Madere. I'm with the City of New Orleans Termite, Rodent, and Mosquito Control Board, and I'm here today to speak to you about mice. Specifically house mice, mus musculus or mus domesticus, depending which you prefer. So we're going to start out with basic stuff, telling difference between a juvenile rat and a house mouse. Okay guys, first, hopefully by now you've learned that the size hole needed for a mouse to enter a structure is 1/4 of an inch, and the size needed for a rat to enter a structure is 1/2 inch. So if you remember that, if you want to tell the difference between these animals, take the back foot and you're going to go from this part here, let's call it the back knee on the rat if you would, where the hinge joint is, and you're going to measure that from there to the tip of the toe. And on a rat, it's going to be 1/2 inch or larger always. On a mouse, it's going to be 1/4 inch or smaller always. So if you can remember, 1/4 inch is the size for a mouse to get in a hole, and it's also the size that's going to be 1/4 inch or less for that back foot, then you can remember how to identify these animals. Now, please be sure that these animals are dead when you do this. If you do it when you're alive, they will bite you. So with that, we're going to move into a little area and we're going to take a look around and see spots where you might find house mice in an agricultural setting. So let's take a walk, guys. Okay, everybody, so we're in the bait room here. We're at a stables, so when you go to a place like a stables, of course, there's a lot of feed for these animals. So look around and we're going to look at one of the key problems right here when you're dealing with rodents. It's sanitation. There's a lot of loose feed on the ground. There's food here that's just left out exposed so the rodents can get easy access to this. So this becomes a real struggle because this becomes a target. Rodent proofing it's possible on a building like this, but it's very, very difficult. So Once you identify your issues like this, you're going to look for signs that the animals were actually there. And with house mice, there's one of my favorite signs we're going to look for here, and it's easy to find. So we're going to come look in this corner, and with little effort whatsoever, mixed into all that dust in there, you're going to see an American cockroach wing. And I'll go back in again, and let's see, another American cockroach wing. So when you're finding things like this, these cockroach wings, that's a great sign that you have house mouse issues, because the animals will come in and eat these individual cockroaches, and they don't consume the wings. They'll leave them behind. A lot of times they leave the legs behind too. So that's a good sign that you have them. Droppings are also a great sign. That smell that mice leave behind, learn that smell. That is a selling point too. So when you go into a restaurant, you smell that mouse smell, you can ask the manager, hey, need some pest control service? I know you have a mouse issue. So, use these things to your advantage. Learn them. If you want to know what the mouse smell smells like, go to your pet shop in your town and ask them to smell the mouse tank. They're going to think you're nuts, but it's worth it. It's a great learning experience, and you'll never forget the aroma. So these are just a couple of quick, easy tips, guys, for trying to locate mice and knowing when you have mouse issues. So let's continue, and we're going to talk about some control methods. Hey everyone, if you're doing residential rodent control, especially for mice, it's easy to get accomplished with sanitation, exclusion, and trapping. A lot of times baiting isn't necessary when you're doing residence because it's a small area. We can limit that food output, and we can limit the resources available to these rodents. But when you get into an ag situation, you're in an area like this with chicken ranches and pig farms, and in this case large horse stables, you're going to have to rely on rodenticides for part of your work. It's just necessary. It's not feasible to trap out this place because it's so large and the food sources are so abundant. So we can see we have bait stations here put out. We need to get better as an industry in general at this. Bait station placement and monitoring it correctly. So obviously you're not going to get activity if your station's in a ditch here. Even the horse agrees with me. You're not going to get activity in these stations. So you have to pick it up and put it there. We teach this all the time in the classes. The rats want to run this way. They want to follow these walls. They feel comfortable touching them. So you stand a much better chance of getting the animal into the station and having them consume the rodenticide if it's properly placed out. And people ask a lot, when is it overkill? How many stations do I put out? When is it underkill? When am I not putting out enough stations? Situations vary. There is no solid cut in stone good answer for that. In a situation like this, is this too many stations behind me down this run? No, I can't answer that because I don't know the rodent activity that they're getting on this run. This might not be enough. It might be the perfect amount. Maybe it is too many. The only way to really know is for you to come and service these accounts monthly and keep up. And sometimes you have to come more than monthly because you need to make sure these stations are never left empty when you are using rodenticides, because you're missing a chance at eliminating your issue every time there's an empty station. Same thing goes for using snap traps. You better come back every day and monitor these traps. If you leave a dead rodent in there, you left a food source out for those guys. Or if you left an empty snap trap, then they're not going to come to it if there's no bait in it. So that's something in our industry I think we should really take a look at. Making sure that we use proper stewardship when it comes to using rodenticides and using them properly and using bait stations. They need to go out where they're labeled to go out, where they're required to go out, and where also the animals dictate that they go out, where you see the signs, where you see the activity. So when you're looking for house mice, remember, you're looking for a hole that's about 1/4 inch in size that they can use to enter structures. So that's about the size of a dime. For a rat, you're looking for a hole that's about 1/2 inch in size, which is about the size of a quarter. So if we look at this door here and we follow the gap, a lot of times this is where rodents enter our structures, be it house mice or rats. And when you put that quarter to it, that is more than enough room for that quarter to enter in there. So a rat, be it Norway or roof rat, would have no problem. And as for the dime, well, we could probably fit a whole roll of dimes through that gap. So house mice would also have no issue whatsoever entering this structure. So when you're doing your inspections, always make sure that the thresholds on the doors are sealed up well. Make sure that the rodents don't chew through, because they're little velociraptors. They're always going around and testing our perimeter, seeing if there's some spot where they can take advantage of it, or if they can pop through and get through our defenses. So stay vigilant, and they love door sweeps like that. Also garage doors if you're doing a residence, or even in areas like this where we're at today on a farm at a horse stable, there's a lot of doors that slide in to shut. And a lot of times they have vinyl seals on them. Well, make sure that those vinyl seals actually line up and seal so that they perform as they should and keep the rodents out. And if you guys look really close, we have a little friend right here. So looking at our little friend, this is a juvenile roof rat. So we're going to take that quarter and we're going to put it against that back leg right here. And you see, guys, that quarter's just about as long from here to the tips on the toes right there. That's about a ½ inch, right? So when you go into ID these and you want to tell them apart from a house mouse, all you have to do is measure from this hinge joint right here to the tips of the toes. That's about a ½ inch. On a house mouse, when you measure from that joint to the tips of the toes, it's always going to be about the size of the dime. So always make sure that these animals are dead when you're doing this, otherwise they will bite you. So with that, we're going to move on and we're going to start looking at some other things regarding house mice and farms. When setting up your rodent control program, one of the first things you should do after your inspection is set up monitoring devices, because when you do your inspection, you're going to figure out where you need to put these monitoring devices. Now, there are various methods you can use for monitoring, be it indoors or outdoors. Glue boards are pretty much the industry standard for monitoring, and they're a very useful tool for that. If you guys don't know how to use glue boards to monitor for rodents, here's the key. You're looking for the vibrissae, you're looking for the whiskers, because when that rodent runs the rooms and they run the edges, they put those whiskers forward and they get caught on those glue boards and they pull back. So you can go back and you can tell if they've been active or not by looking for those vibrissae on those boards. Other methods are, you can use live catch methods, where you have multi-catch mouse traps actually, where they catch live individuals. Now, I'd mentioned earlier about if you're running traps and stations that you should monitor these regularly because you need to keep up with them. Well, if you're monitoring live trap devices, you need to monitor those daily, because otherwise those animals are going to die and start to stink. Hypothermia sets in mice very rapidly actually, especially if you're using a multi-catch device on a cold concrete floor. You're generally going to come back to some mousicles. So also, if you have multiple individuals in a trap, sometimes they will go cannibalistic, so you'll find tails and ears. But these are very useful tools in our job, and they're required actually. If you want to do your job correctly, you need to monitor. You need to know where your situation is, where your populations are, what the numbers look like, and you need to know when you get to zero. So another tool that can be used for monitoring, you could use game cameras. If you're going to use game cameras for mice though, it takes a lot of practice. They're little bolts of lightning. They're zooming here and there. So I'd advise, don't start with pictures, start with video. That way you can pause it frame by frame and actually see when the mouse is going through. Another little trick, once you learn their trails and their runs, if you put a device in the trail that the mouse runs every day, because he's hardwired to run that trail. They smell, mice use urine to communicate, so they're putting down little droplets on their trails that they run every day. So as they're running the trail, if you put a brick or something to just random in that pathway, when the mouse approaches, they usually come to a dead stop because they're not used to it. They get on their legs and they sniff and they put their little nose up in the air and they smell and they'll investigate. Sometimes they go around, but once they get used to it and they mark it, after that they jump that. Use that to your advantage. A lot of times I'll put a glue board behind that brick, or I'll put my monitoring device there, or I'll put my camera there, because I know the animal's going to pause. It's going to throw it off slightly. So that it gives you an opportunity to actually see the animal and see what's going on. So these are all just a couple of more little hints and tips and advice on getting mouse control done, and especially in this case, monitoring for mice.
Our final two guest speakers will talk about how IPM principles apply to different species in multiple environments. Dr. Neve Quinn is the Human Wildlife Interactions Advisor with the University of California Cooperative Extension, and Dr. Bobby Corrigan is the world's best-known urban rodentologist.
Hello, my name is Neve Quinn and I am the Human Wildlife Interactions Advisor with the University of California's Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. My role is to develop education and research material surrounding commensal rodent management. Rodent management is very, very complex, and it's not a one-size-fits-all type of job. It's important to consider all the tools in the toolbox and to integrate all of these into a successful rodent management program. Rodent management requires a carefully considered and implemented plan. Each site will have different challenges. It's important to embrace these challenges and make sure that you use your tools effectively, safely, and you limit the amount of non-target exposure. Because we know that rat and mouse urinary proteins cause early onset of asthma in sensitized children, rodent management in schools is of particular concern. Conducive conditions in school are not always what you would expect them to be. They can be in areas that you can't exclude or remove, like AC units, or in things like storage containers. So now that you've determined that you have a roof rat problem, you need to develop a rodent management plan. This plan needs to have both monitoring and management. It's important to monitor for both effectiveness and non-target impacts. Remember that your rodent management system is dynamic, it's ever-changing, and you need to make sure that you monitor for non-target issues that may arise. And remember that not just the use of rodenticide causes non-target impacts, also the use of traps, glue, and other management tools can have non-target impacts. If you choose to apply rodenticide, remember it's important to consult the label and apply the product in a safe and effective manner. It is important to consult the situation, see what's going on before you apply the product. Remember that most rodents will display some level of neophobia. This can be difficult to overcome. Research has shown that it can take up to 10 days for roof rats to actually enter into bait stations. To overcome this, it's important to follow the label and maintain a fresh supply of bait in your bait station. If a roof rat enters a bait station, you want to make sure that there is something inside this bait station that will kill it. Make sure that you maintain a fresh supply of bait at all times. Options to consider are increasing the frequency at which you visit your bait station to make sure that you always have a fresh supply of bait. You can also consider adding more placements. You can also move your bait stations. Just remember not to move too quick because rats are neophobic. Remember to return to the site at regular intervals and follow the label directions to search for carcasses and any bait that may have become accessible to non-targets. Research has shown that the majority of rats will die in areas that are not accessible to large predators. Trash management should always be a concern in all aspects of pest management. It provides abundant food resources for rodents. It is always important to keep your trash cans closed and to keep them far away from structures. This is not a good example of good trash management. However, even in areas that have really good trash management, that have really good landscaping, we can still find rat populations. And these areas can be difficult to assess because we assume that rat populations are associated with conducive conditions, and this is not always true. Commensal rodents, particularly mice, don't travel far. Because of this, you need to have multiple tools that provide good coverage. This is important to overcome certain behaviors like dominance. Remember that you need to have good coverage and lots of devices to access the entire population because that is what you are trying to manage. Remember that rats migrate from outside, so it's important to always have a fresh supply of bait or an active snap trap in your station. Here on the West Coast, even in the tidiest of yards, there are plenty of resources for commensal rodents. Please ensure that you are not creating resources for these rodents to harbour in. In areas where fruit and nuts are grown, these provide abundant food resources for rodents. Remember to harvest your fruit and pick it up, but also remember to clean it well so you prevent the mechanical transfer of foodborne illnesses. Rats can also exploit natural resources, things like invertebrates and the fruits and the seeds from landscape plants.
Hello, my name is Bobby Corrigan. I'm an urban rodentologist, a scientist who studies rats and mice and the ways we need to control them in cities. As we all know, controlling rats and mice in cities is not easy. We need essential tools. And one of those essential tools are the use of rodent baits, or rodenticides. However, we want to make sure that when we use rodenticides, such as any pesticide, that we always practice integrated pest management. So here we are in an alleyway, which is famous for rats, and which we inspect first because rats love alleyways. We have to look for conducive conditions, such as lots of trash, which the rats can use for food, and lots of harborage, where they can duck into buildings below doors and pipes through walls and these kinds of areas. They love to use alleyways also because they can hide in dark, shadowy corners. And those are the kinds of things, when we put them all together, we can decide whether there's a lot of rats or only a few rats. And we can also decide by doing our inspection is where is the best places to put rodenticides so that they are not going to be contacted by non-target animals, and they stay within their boxes, secured in tamper-resistant bait stations. So that's what we're doing in this alleyway, is we're going to analyze it first. And we want to look at openings that lead into buildings such as this. This pipeway leads in, and rats will simply climb up easily, enter the building through pipes. They will go beneath doorways, such as this gap. It only takes 12 millimeters for a rat to squeeze beneath a door. And rats and mice love to follow walls for a sense of touch. And wherever they follow walls, they will occasionally leave grease smudges that are very fine darkening of the cement, but you can pick it up as a professional. And right here we see darkening in a corner. That's from rodents. When they stop at a corner, they leave smudge marks and urine and feces. So these doors, these delivery doors that roll up and roll down and are very old, rarely fit snug to the cement anymore, allowing rats and mice quick entry at night when no one is around. So as we proceed down the alleyway, we can see right ahead here we have openings, more clear openings, and lots of smears from rodents coming and going into that opening. So that would tell us this is a very active wall for rats in this alley every night. So here we can see, we have these smudge marks that rats and mice leave on runways on top of the sidewalk before they duck below doors. And so this area is very rat active during the nighttime when the rats are active at their time, not our time. And there's all this trash about, all this trash we can see, and that's what the rats want, is all this food trash and litter, and that sustains them. And we have to try as best as possible to get all of this cleaned up by the property owners of these buildings. So here we have a tamper-resistant bait station that is very specific in design for protecting baits from being carried out of the station or being tampered with. So the baits that are installed in this bait station are installed on rods, metal rods that affix within the station, and the baits are put onto the rods so the rats cannot drag out the bait and steal them. And that's called a tamper-resistant bait station, and it has to meet criteria from the EPA for certain sturdiness, and it cannot be broken easily, and it can be locked and then secured in place. Tamper-resistant bait stations. We should never, ever throw baits along corners or any areas without it being secured in a bait station, because then non-target animals will get into that bait, and these baits can kill non-target animals. So we must be careful. So in summary, we have to keep in mind that IPM is the way to go with rodent control. And that essentially means we only use rodenticides when needed, and we use them in only the amounts that will get the job done. We have to protect public health with these rodenticides for sure, but we also cannot harm the environment in any way with these essential tools. So it's a situation of we must be responsible to the environment and to also the importance of public health, because rats and mice are public health animals that can transmit diseases. Thank you for your responsibility, and thank you for your professionalism.
Communicating with the customer is another important aspect of your job. You can provide information about safety precautions and educate the customer about conducive conditions and how to correct them. Pictures are often helpful in pointing out issues the customers need to address. Let the customer know where the bait and bait stations are located. For commercial and agricultural accounts, consider giving the customer a site map of the locations. That way, they can let you know if something is out of place. Provide customers with basic safety information about the bait and stations, including the label and the safety data sheet. Remind them never to disturb the bait stations or move them. Bait stations should always be locked and secured. If there is an open or broken station or bait outside the station, the customer must notify you immediately. As pest management professionals, you have a legal and ethical responsibility to use rodenticides according to best practices that minimize the risk of non-targets being exposed to rodenticides. Rodents are prey for other wildlife. Inconsistent or poor rodent control practices lead to spikes in rodent numbers and may increase the risk that non-target species will be exposed to rodents that have eaten the bait. By keeping rodent numbers low through effective control practices, you minimize the risk of exposure to wildlife. IPM requires that you monitor target pest activity and adjust your control methods as needed to keep numbers below your threshold. There are three main pathways by which non-target wildlife can be exposed to rodenticides: primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary exposure is when a non-target animal gains access to a bait station and directly consumes the bait. By placing the bait stations in known rodent pathways near rodent burrows or nests and constantly evaluating the changing environment, you can target rats and mice while minimizing exposure to non-target species. Secondary exposure is when a rodent eats the rodenticide, then another animal such as a hawk or a coyote consumes that rodent. Tertiary exposure is when another animal eats that hawk or coyote that has been secondarily exposed. All these situations can be mitigated by carefully using rodenticides as part of an IPM program. To minimize non-target exposure, it is important to place bait stations in locations where they cannot be accessed by non-target species and to monitor the stations to make sure they have not been disturbed. Using bait in locked and secured bait stations, as the label states, can limit most non-targets from gaining access to the bait. Following the rodenticide label, placing bait stations in appropriate areas is key to reducing the risk of non-targets while still providing effective rodent control. Also, consider the changing population dynamics of the non-target organisms. As predators and other non-targets fluctuate in population and location, station placement should be adjusted. As always, use as many rodent management tools as possible to provide the most effective control, including sanitation, habitat modification, exclusion, and trapping. In summary, rodenticides are part of an effective IPM program. Monitor rodent activity frequently and respond to increases promptly. And make sure to adapt methods as needed. The program should not be static. Bait and bait station placement is essential. Getting the rodenticide close to where the rodents are and in the pathways results in a higher bait uptake by rodents and less non-target animal interactions. At all times, be aware of non-targets in the area, preventing them from accessing rodenticides and exposed rodents. Sanitation and exclusion can also be components of an effective rodent control program. It is important to communicate with the customer. Let them know what you did and how they can help with the rodent management program. Thank you for your attention during this rodenticide stewardship training. It is brought to you by the Rodenticide Task Force, and the members are listed here. As a reminder, if you have any questions about the use of rodenticides, please reach out to the product manufacturer for more information. The Rodenticide Task Force would like to thank Dr. Claudia Riegel, Mr. Timmy Madere, Dr. Neve Quinn, and Dr. Bobby Corrigan. The Rodenticide Task Force would also like to thank Dr. Jim Fredericks from NPMA and RISE for their support of this project. Please take the short optional quiz to test your knowledge on rodenticide use. It can be found at www.responsiblerodenticides.org. Thank you for attending and using rodenticides responsibly.